Yeah, times do change. But if we pivot back to, because I agree with what you're saying, and one of the talking points, probably of the last year, I would say, is this thing around performance consulting.
Yeah.
Working with the business and making sure that all of that stuff is adding value. That whatever we do adds value. And I don't think this is just an L&D point. I think this is pretty much every department and every business is trying to demonstrate value more than they used to. And that means that inevitably we need to have different skills, we need to have different conversations, we need to be measuring different things. And for me, data is a big one. When we talk about performance support, performance consulting, how does that change for you? The things, because you mentioned earlier on, you mentioned maybe 30 minutes ago, looking at the clock, you mentioned KPIs that had been given to you when you were a training department. And now, hopefully, you pivot that conversation, you're developing your own KPIs. What kinds of things are you measuring when you move into the support, the performance support arena that are different to the traditional L&D sort of courses, click-throughs and things like that? How are you changing what you measure?
Yeah, and I think that's an ongoing journey. There's no doubt if we talk about trying to shift from what we would call inputs, I guess, right, and course completions. I mean, that's always an indicator. And we're seeing, of course, an uptick in terms of our inputs, right? In terms of the fact of introducing the new technologies, new resources, with AI first sort of enablement. We're seeing certainly, I think, in that first form of engagement levels to increase to a much higher level by 40, 50, 60%, which is phenomenal, right? In terms of from the content that we have, the resource engagement. I think that's a fantastic part. I think the hardest part for any learning and development professional in any organization, and we know is measurement of impacts to the business specifically. And we are starting now. I mean, we try to do it, but it's so difficult and challenging to follow that journey from, the layers of Kirkpatrick or Phillips or whichever model you use of ROI and impact. It's so hard to do that, right? So I'm not saying anything that's unusual to anyone that's listening that's tried to measure ROI on learning interventions. We are looking at, for example, the management development program that I just mentioned earlier. We are looking at, okay, so when a 1 year out, 2 years out, looking at, let's say, retention numbers, looking at promotions in terms of, okay, how many of those people, sort of A/B testing, how many people went through this program versus how many people, of course, have got grown in the business, for example. What impact has there been on performance in their particular business unit? So these are the things that we're putting into place already. And when it comes to areas of account management and sales, using, of course, AI simulations, which we're about to put into place today as we move forward, what has been the impact once again on increasing sales based on the learning that they've gone through versus those that haven't gone through that process. So again, this is work in progress. I mean, it really is a tough challenge, and I'm not going to deny or hide that, Ashwin, at all. We still do the basics, of course, completions and engagement levels and so on. But I'm fully aware. Okay, can we underscore that with real hardcore KPIs? Very, very challenging to do, but we're on that journey.
Yeah, it's for me, this comes up time and time again, right? And I've done this multiple times with clients. For me, this is multivariate modeling. There are two parts to this. One is you need to have a data model, and the other part is that you need to be measuring the right things. And you plug the data into your model, and then you get outputs. It's fairly classical stuff. Why? I don't mean this as a pointy why, but why do you think learning and development departments struggle with this concept of ROI and data modeling so much?
I think there could be a number of reasons. One of them that I've identified, which I think is replicated in most L&D organizations in an organization, is the process takes a lot of energy and time and resources. The easiest thing you can ever do, of course, is to get the initial data and dashboarding of engagement, for example, or course completions. Fine. Okay, you get that. Quiz results, whatever it might be, test results. That's the easy part, especially nowadays with the technology getting better and better to capture that data. And that's the often the sort of time that the report is used, as satisfaction surveys, you put it out there, it's done. Trying to follow that up, okay, coming back to what's happening in terms of the company culture, the type of business you're in, the type of work that people are doing, you would need to follow up over a period of time in order to measure that impact of that
Mhm.
learning. Because there are different layers, as we know, right, in terms of the pyramid or whatever it might be you're using on behavior change or performance impact, sales increase, whatever, retention numbers, etc. That takes a lot of time. And already the individuals or the stakeholders have moved on. You've delivered what you've delivered. You've got the initial results, and maybe they're satisfied with that, but they're not necessarily asking for something else after. The L&D department certainly is looking for it, but guess what? The amount of work that we have to do to continue the process of what we do still continues. I think being able to balance that time and the resource required to follow that full journey to get to those end results and that end impact, it's very challenging. And people just say, just move on, right? We're focusing on the next big thing that we have to work on. We don't have the time, we don't have the resources. Is that an excuse? It might be, but I do feel that that's been the reality that what we've been facing for quite a number of years.
While you've been talking, I've had a realization, right? And that realization is because you've mentioned Kirkpatrick a couple of times and you've talked about measuring behavior change. Now, measuring behavior change is classically difficult in nearly all of the psychology literature and information systems literature, or any of the literature that is founded on the theory of reasoned action or the theory of planned behavior or anything like that, which are by design kind of multivariate models anyway. Any of the literature that's founded on those things nearly always has a low-ish adjusted R squared when it comes to the model. So how much of the variance of, intention to do something can you explain with the factors that you're measuring? And it's not great. Behavioral science, generally speaking, would be, 40 to 50% explanation of variance would be a good thing. That would be an amazing statistic. If you look at hard sciences, that would be thrown out of the water, right? And the realization that I was having while you were talking is the nature of Kirkpatrick itself. So this is a model that pretty much everybody in the L&D business knows, and the ones that don't know it rapidly, as soon as they attend a conference or read anything about learning, they'll find it out, right? And I suspect the realization that I've just had while you're talking is that I suspect that because L&D folks are able to measure things like satisfaction and engagement, which are fluff anyway, and they're able to measure attendance, which again is vanity, it doesn't matter, and they're not able to easily measure behavior, they then don't go on to measure the things that matter to the business because they stop at this point in the middle. And I was thinking about every example that I've got of where I've worked with a client to model this stuff out. We've never looked at behavior. It doesn't matter, right? It actually doesn't matter if you have something around learning interventions and you have the results of the behavior, i.e. what people do at work, which you can measure. Why are you trying to measure behavior? And this might just be the stumbling block that everybody's saying, I don't know how to measure behavior, so I'm not going to bother with the other stuff. And I think there's another barrier there, and that is usually, I get this complaint a lot, but L&D departments will say, I asked the operations guys for their data, but they didn't want to give it to me. Nobody wanted to share it. I don't know how to get around that. What assumptions do I make? So I think there are these two things that probably are causing this industry-wide barrier that for me just seems not a barrier. And I think you've given me that realization.
I think this, Ashwin, yeah, you're absolutely right. But I think there's other elements as well. And every organization will be different, maybe in terms of how their leadership perceives learning and development and the value that it brings. Mm-hmm. And what are they asking for in terms of ROI? I remember attending an LPI conference not long ago. Can't remember who was speaking. And they said, there were about 100, and that's where we were there as well. Ashwin, you were there. And the question was asked to the audience. There were about 100 of us there. How many of you actually asked for ROI data from your CEO or the C-level? And I think about 10% of the room put their hand up. And I think that was an interesting indicator. Asked, right? It doesn't mean say we don't believe it's important. We do. I think we struggle with it. We say we want to prove it. Maybe we're always fighting for the wrong thing, right? In terms of, are we putting our energy into something that, is challenging, and there's a reason why it's challenging? Where are we putting our energy? Are we being asked that? And to be fair, if I ask that question to myself, who is asking me for ROI data? The answer is no one at the moment. Doesn't mean to say that we should, take our eye off the ball about the value that we provide. Otherwise, why do we exist? Otherwise, we shouldn't have a job. That's why I always focus on what is that value? And that value can mean so many different things. It's not just about the behavior change, but the applicability, certainly, yes. Okay, are you applying at least at that level of what you're learning that's made a difference, whatever that difference might mean, right, to an individual? And has that helped you? It's almost that level of sort of discussion that we tend to have, and what then people are saying about the value they perceive they're getting out of the programs, resources, being a part of something, right, which is about our culture. The fact that, wow, this is an organization that believes and invests in learning, and I'm proud of that. If people are saying that, and that's what I'm really excited about, that I'm excited about attending the business academy that we had in Copenhagen as an opportunity. The fact that we take those learnings and actually then have continuity because we localize it with managing directors. They find value in those actions that learning and development has created. And then they continue to leverage that content that we've created, and they will apply it at local level. And we keep a track of that. Now, that in itself, that to me is value. And if the managing directors also are talking about that value and how their employees are feeling excited about, for example, these programs that they're attending, that seems to be extremely powerful for our business. I'm not saying that's okay for other businesses, but for us, that seems to be a massive driving force. And when our CEO talks about it and says, you know what we're doing from a learning and development point of view as our strategy is extremely powerful, and we really are pushing the boundaries and leading the way. Well, I think that's what we're looking to hear, and I think it's fantastic that we get that kind of feedback from such a level of the company.
I'm going to ask a pointy question now, right? Everything you've just described, I'll be devil's advocate for a second. Everything you've just described is CEO satisfaction, is manager satisfaction, is regional satisfaction, is stakeholder satisfaction. It's just satisfaction, right?
True.
It's not value in terms of value chain. It's nothing to do with value, right? People can be very unhappy and still be productive. People can be very unhappy and still learn a lot. In fact, I would go as far as to say people learn the most and remember the most for situations that they were uncomfortable and unhappy in.
Absolutely.
So, right, we've measured lots of satisfaction. Everybody's happy, everybody's satisfied, everybody's shaking each other's hands. Great. What's the relation of that to business value?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I mean, but again, I think when we think about where we are today with, and that use an example, with generative AI and the ability to bring, as a learning and development department, beyond satisfaction, bringing relevant, meaningful content, which develops the knowledge and capabilities of our global talent base. In this case, it's a directive from the CEO saying, we are, as part of our vision, going to put AI first, right, in terms of part of our business strategy. We, of course, align to that and say, right, this is what we're going to provide, right, continuously over the coming year and beyond, step by step in phases to have, for example, a readiness framework in place. And indeed, engage everyone in the company. And that is something we work with, for example, with the CIO in hand, and ultimately to try and upskill our people. Now, that has been a continuous journey so far, starting over a year ago. And that is something that continues in terms of providing the capabilities through learning and development to do a more effective job. So this is not just about satisfaction. It is that skilling part. It is about how can you be more productive? How can you use AI in such a way that's going to help you to be more creative? So all of the different functions as well as the business. That is something that's concrete. Now, do we say that's value? Then it's a question of what's your definition of value, Ashwin, right? And what's mine? Now, is that just satisfaction? Yeah, they may be satisfied the fact that we're providing them with the relevant training, but is it bringing value to the point that, hey, it's helping me be better using this new technology that I didn't know before, and now I have the knowledge and skills to be better at what I do? So the answer is that's what we're trying to do.
The thing I'm trying to tease out is that there is a difference between your CEO says implement an AI literacy course and you do it and everybody's happy versus you have because we were talking about measurement. Ultimately, we were talking about measurement. And there's a difference between that you measure satisfaction, everybody is happy and you log that, versus you have a way to relate what you do to the value chain of the business. So the things that matter to the business are usually our share price, revenue, sales volume, these kinds of things. And the reason I talk in that respect is because when we talk about performance consulting, we're also talking about the performance of the business, not the performance of the learning department. So if we have programs we've been told to implement and people are happy that we implemented them, then we are order takers. And fine, people are always going to be happy having order takers around to do their bidding. That's not the same as relating learning performance to business performance as part of the value chain. So that's why I'm trying to tease that out to see if.
So don't you think learning performance? I have a question for you then. So don't you think learning performance has a link to business performance? And I'm not
talking. It should do.
So in other words, the end result of if we consider learning itself and what we're providing. In terms of the programs, resources, initiatives, and that we target as, okay, this is to help you improve your performance in whatever area that is, right, that you need to upskill in or grow, whatever. I call that learning, the performance part of the learning and development department, right? So we're actually boosting or driving performance of the individual or teams. So to me, if that is a direct connection to the performance, it should show a direct performance to the business in various areas, depending on whatever you're providing as the need and support. So what's your take on that? I'm curious.